and I do really struggle to find it in my tiny liberal heart to feel terrible for Republicans when we get called things like communists, socialists, thugs, pedophiles. Donald Trump called Democrats every name in the book. It is part of the Republican playbook to demonize us and to make it seem like it is the end of the world if Democrats are in power.
As she guest hosted Sean Hannity's program, former Trump press secretary Kayleigh McEnany had the audacity to complain to liberal powerhouse Jessica Tarlov that Democrats demonize Republicans, prompting Tarlov to put McEnany in her place on live TV by reminding McEnany about the ceaseless partisan cruelty of her party and its leader, McEnany's ex-boss, Donald Trump. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, we've got a long clip here. Actually, we have several clips to look at and several receipts to read. But this is something that we talk about in video after video after video. And this just happens to be the most iconic manifestation of the phenomenon I'm about to describe that I've seen in recent memory, which is that the Republican Party is the party of hypocritical snowflakes. This is the party of F your feelings and, drinking liberal tears out of tumblers and things like that. Like, they're endlessly cruel. And yet when any Democrat or any progressive or any leftist gives just a little bit of it back, they can't handle it. They cry bully. They clutch their pearls and complain. And you need only look at Kayleigh McEnany's segment as she guest hosts Sean Hannity's show. She spends like 10 minutes complaining and clutching her pearls that Democrats are so mean to Republicans. Thank God Jessica Tarlov's on hand. So let's watch the clip and we'll unpack it together.
Now, of course, this happens all the time. Democrats love to trash, put down, vilify Republicans as threats to democracy. Here's a reminder.
The last thing we need is Neanderthal thinking that in the meantime everything's fine, take off your mask, forget it. It still matters.
So many of those extremists, those MAGA extremists, take their marching orders from Donald Trump, who has no credibility left by any measure. He's only in it for himself. He's now defending himself in civil actions and criminal actions. And when do they break with him? Because at some point, maybe there needs to be a formal deprogramming of the cult members.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
So she cites two examples, of course, of President Biden, Secretary Clinton, and she's like, look, these are examples of like ceaselessly cruel partisan attacks against the Republican Party. And then she brings on Jessica Tarlov and some right-wing schmuck on here, but we're going to focus on the exchange between McEnany and Tarlov because Tarlov makes an incredible point, and I'm so glad that McEnany was stupid enough to bring Tarlov on to do just that.
Jessica, as a very eloquent Democrat who rationally communicates your point of view, I assume you look at these moments and think they're not helpful for your party.
Yeah, well, first of all, Chris Matthews isn't really the ringleader of the party anymore. He was fired from MSNBC and has only just resurfaced a little while ago. Obviously, Hillary Clinton is someone who is incredibly important to the party, and I have defended her comments in that interview, talking about the fact that Democrats are so far from being in a cult on a comparative basis to Republicans. It's actually laughable, and I do really struggle to find it in my tiny liberal heart to feel terrible for Republicans when we get called things like communists, socialists, thugs, pedophiles. Donald Trump called Democrats every name in the book. It is part of the Republican playbook to demonize us and to make it seem like it is the end of the world if Democrats are in power. So, yes, will Chris Matthews' statement be cut up and put into ads? Sure. Are we going to have a problem with white working class voters, especially if Donald Trump is the nominee on the Republican side? Yes, 100%. But that doesn't mean that there isn't merit in what they're talking about in terms
100%. And the interview goes on for about 10 minutes here, but you can just see it on McEnany's face where she's just outraged. Now, before I back Tarlov up with some receipts from Trump, I do want to correct the record here about the Independence Hall speech that President Biden gave that McEnany played a very segmented clip of, in which he talks about MAGA Republicans, right? So you may not remember, but he actually he addresses the situation here. He goes, Too much of what's happening in our country today is not normal. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. And that was the clip she played. But the very next line, now I want to be very clear, applause, very clear up front. Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans, are MAGA Republicans. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. I know because I've been able to work with these mainstream Republicans. Okay. So, and he goes on repeatedly. Every time President Biden happens to talk about the extremism that's rampant in the Republican Party, he gives like 30 disclaimers up front and then at the end. Okay. Does Donald Trump ever do that when he talks about the radical left, the Marxists and the communists and the socialists? Do Republicans do that when they insult blue cities like Chicago? Chicago is so crime infested, or blue states. Do they do that? Are they nearly as careful with their words? Of course not. They don't do a fraction of the due diligence to avoid hurting feelings or sounding incendiary. Biden had to walk a tightrope to recognize, as the nation's chief executive, a legitimate threat that is exclusive to one party, and it is, as Liz Cheney, a person who voted with Trump 93% of the time and voted for him for the presidency, acknowledged this is a unique problem at the moment to the Republican Party, and yet Biden went out of his way. The president repeatedly went out of his way to say not all Republicans, not even most Republicans. And I'd make the argument that he was being too generous to the Republic. He was being too kind. But Donald Trump doesn't do anything like that. I'm just going to, again, bring some of the receipts to drive point Jessica Tarlov's point home.
We are now in the process of defeating the radical left, the Marxists, the anarchists, the agitators, the looters, and people who, in many instances, have absolutely no clue what they are doing.
And at no point, this was from the 2020, July 4th, 2020 speech when he was still the president. At no point did he say, I'm not talking about all Democrats. Most Democrats are cool. I get along with. He didn't do what Biden did. He just painted with a broad brush. If you go to Twitter, there is an account called Donald J. Trump Posts from his Truth Social. So it just takes his Truth Central posts and puts them on Twitter. And if you just do a search for Marxists, radical left, Democrats, you can keep scrolling for days. And he never gives the caveat that he's talking about a very small segment. He just paints with a broad brush. Anybody who disagrees with him, anybody who votes against him, anybody who opposes him are radical communist, socialist, Marxist groomers. And that was the other thing. I'm so glad that Tarlov brought that up. You know, even the most debased of the comments, the groomer remark, Republicans and conservative commentators throw that word out like left, right, and center to suggest and insinuate that Democrats are perverted in some way, even though there's a great account you should follow on Twitter and a running database of all the conservative and Republican public officials who have been either charged, accused, or convicted of sexual related crimes, be it, you know, statutory rape or anything like that. So again, like every accusation is almost a confession, and yet they paint the opposition with such a broad brush in a way that simply the left and Democrats just generally don't do. You take the most incendiary rhetoric to come from President Biden, and it is simply a fact that it is infinitely more couched and nuanced than the crap that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth. Again, when he was president, you know, he was talking about wanting to cut federal funding to several major cities, all run by Democrats and located in blue states, on the ground that their leaders were allowing anarchy, violence, and destruction, just painting blue states. How many times has he and other major Republican leaders complained about blue cities and how they're crime-ridden, infested, and dirty? He does it about Washington, D.C. even now, right? He's not just referring to certain like major party leaders, right? He's talking about hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people potentially. That is what Kayleigh McEnany's boss used to say. And yet just no self-awareness whatsoever. She, a member of the F Your Feelings Snowflake party, the party that drinks out of liberal tears tumblers, a party who's led by the biggest bully in American politics and perhaps in the history of American politics, she's complaining that occasionally Joe Biden and certain other Democrats will say some blunt things about a segment of either the Republican base or the Republican political establishment. They grade Republicans on a curve. In her mind and in the minds of every conservative commentator out there, and like many enlightened centrists, conservatives and Republicans can just say whatever they want, whenever they want about Democrats, progressives, liberals, leftists, blue cities, blue states. It doesn't matter. But if you give just an ounce of it back, how dare you? You shouldn't do that. You can't say these things. They are the snowflakes, infinitely more than Democrats. MAGA Republican elected officials, and yes, many of the cult members, many of the rank and file, they are snowflakes. And that's my point when people ask me or say to me, Josiah, you're too mean to a lot of the MAGA Republicans that you either talk about or you debate with. Here's my point. I am not obligated, nor are any of you, and this is exactly what they want you to think. They want you to think that you're obligated to be kinder to the biggest bullies in American politics than those bullies are to everybody else. They think you owe Donald Trump a courtesy and a kindness and a respect that he doesn't give to anybody else. Screw that. Hell no. If you choose to be kind to conservatives, make that a choice. Listen, I'm kind to conservatives all the time. I have conservative family members and friends whom I love, but I'm not obligated to treat them better than they treat me. And you're not obligated to treat MAGA Republicans better than they treat other people. You're not obligated. So when Kayleigh McEnany and others like her clutch their pearls about this, you should do what Jessica Tarlov said. Like, no, you guys call us communist, Marxists, and all the things, pedophiles, perverts, groomers, and not a peep. So if you want me to be nicer to you, then I expect you, Kayleigh McEnany, the next time Donald Trump or somebody else starts to, insinuate things about wide swaths of the left, I expect you to say, no, don't say that. That's wrong. How dare you tar and feather such a large group of people with such a large brush? And then when MAGA Republicans and conservatives start to be consistent in their principle, when they start to be kind to others, then they have a right to expect it from others as well. But that's my position. I love Jessica Tarlov's take on this. I think she did the right thing. I can't believe McEnany was dumb enough to have her on to refute her in real time. But let me know what you think in the comments.